Hi, I'm Claire Williamson, an ex-litigator and the co-founder of Leading Minds. With 97% of lawyers complaining that stress is impacting their health, I think that it's time that we speak about how challenging the pressures of the legal industry can be. So whether you're a trainee, a partner, or anyone in between, I really hope that this podcast will leave you feeling inspired, empowered, and with the confidence that you can leave your mark on the legal industry. So today I'm joined by Kayleigh Leonie, who's a LawCare trustee and a senior solicitor at McFarlane's. And today we're having a really open conversation around about the impact that the challenges the legal industry can have on our mental health. So thank you so much for joining me today, Kayleigh.
Hi Claire, thank you very much for inviting me along to speak to you on this podcast. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you today.
Thanks. I just thought it might be really interesting for everyone to hear a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into the legal industry initially.
Yeah, of course. So I studied law with business at the University of Brighton. I did my LPC at the College of Law in London, and I did my training contract at a high street firm in Brighton. I decided that I wanted to specialise in employment law. The high street firm I was working at in Brighton didn't have any space in the employment law team. So I was in NQ looking for a new role and qualification, which was quite challenging. I took a couple of months out to go travelling, which was great fun, and then found a role in an employment team at a firm in Kent, where I stayed for 3 years. I then made the transition to work for a firm in the city, and I've moved around various city firms since then, and I'm still practicing employment law.
Amazing. That's really interesting that you actually went from a smaller firm initially and then worked up to the city firm. It's normally the other way that people do it.
Yeah, it was quite strange actually, because for the time that I worked in Kent, I lived in London.
Oh.
And for the time that I've worked in London, I've lived in Kent. So I enjoyed the reverse commute for a few years, driving out to Kent and working for a regional firm. But yeah, no, I guess it is quite a strange way of doing things. But when I was applying for training contracts, I really wanted to work in Brighton, and having never sort of lived or worked anywhere in England outside of Brighton before, for me it was the comfort of being able to train somewhere that was familiar. So that's why I was looking at firms down on the south coast.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know what you mean. It's quite a big move, and I'm sure many people at the moment, as they're kind of starting their traineeships as well, are feeling that kind of moving to a new city, thinking, what have I done?
Yeah, exactly. And I think lots of different changes at the same time can also be, make things more challenging as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you actually are a trustee at LawCare. So I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about LawCare and the work that you're, the kind of role that you play there.
Yeah, of course. So LawCare is a charity set up to support good mental health and wellbeing in the legal profession. So if you've not heard of them before, I'd really recommend you take a look at their website. It is full of blogs, helpful fact sheets, guidance for individuals as well as for employers. But they also have a helpline that runs Monday to Friday, where you can phone and talk to someone for confidential advice. They also run a web chat service so that you can talk to people confidentially on their helpline rather than having to phone, which might be difficult if you're in the office. It gives you the ability to be able to chat to someone using the web chat service. And they also run a peer support program. We've also got a network of LawCare champions across the country. So I have sat as a trustee since January 2019, and I'm currently working on LawCare's research project, which we're going to be launching a survey next month in October. So it's all systems go with the research project at the moment. So that's been ongoing for almost a year now. We've been putting together the survey. We had hoped that we were going to be in a position to be able to launch it earlier in the spring, but with everything that's happened and lockdown and all the additional challenges in terms of things that can impact upon well-being, we've pushed it back and are launching it later this year. So that's the kind of work I'm doing with LawCare at the moment. But the kind of key LawCare aims are to support people in the profession, give people a space to talk to people if they need to, share something and open up, and also be there to provide that knowledge on the website through all of those, fact sheets to give people an understanding if they've, they're experiencing a difficult period in their career, that they've got somebody there that they can turn to speak to about it.
Yeah, and I think the work that you guys do is just absolutely phenomenal, because I do think that there is still this stigma attached to talking about mental health in the legal industry, which is kind of ironic, seeing as the pressures that we face in the legal industry. That I think there's quite a few stats out there that show that people are actually more likely to have challenges with their mental health, whilst working in that high pressure legal environment, but less likely to actually talk about it. And talking about stats, I know that this survey that you're launching with LawCare towards the end of this year, or towards, must be October. Is it October you're thinking?
Yeah.
Which we would very much encourage everyone to complete, of course. How are people actually being contacted about that? Is it on your website, or are they being emailed, or?
So at the moment we're just putting the finishing touches to the survey itself. So it's gone out currently to LawCare's Champion Network to trial it as a test.
Okay.
So we're just dealing with all of the feedback that's come in from LawCare's champions to make sure that the survey is the best it can be. But what we will be doing is going out to all of the professional bodies. So LawCare will be reaching out to them directly and asking for their support. But yeah, it will certainly be shared on LawCare's website and on its social media platforms. But we want to encourage as many professional bodies to sort of get behind the survey and support it. Lots of the professional bodies have run their own wellbeing surveys, looking at mental health and stress in the legal profession, but this will be the first survey that looks at the legal profession as a whole. So we're not just looking at solicitors or barristers, we're looking at paralegals, trainees, people at the bar, we're looking at SILEX, we're looking at judges, we're looking at business support staff in the legal profession, and we're not just looking, as I previously have with research I've undertaken, England and Wales. This goes much further, so we're looking at England, Wales, Scotland, the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, Northern Ireland, and Republic of Ireland. So it's a much broader piece of research.
Yeah, and talking about your previous research, this is not your first huge piece of research into mental health in the legal industry, is it?
Yeah, so back in 2017, I almost stumbled across doing a sort of piece of research that I hadn't seen how big it was going to, how big the impact was going to be, I guess I should put it. So I put together a really quick survey for a talk we were due to host at the Law Society of England and Wales Junior Lawyers Division annual conference, and we were planning on doing a talk about stress, and Chetna Bat was coming in to talk about stress, and her and I thought, well, we want to get buy-in for this talk, we want people to come to it, we want people to admit that they're feeling stressed, and that's quite a difficult thing for a junior solicitor to own up to. So we thought, why don't we just run a survey and ask people on an anonymous basis before they come to this conference whether they're feeling stressed by their work, and then at the beginning of the talk we can show them the evidence, give them the statistics, get their buy-in, and then there's no awkward having to put your hand up if you felt stressed in the last week type situation. So it was all around that, tackling the stigma and opening up the conversation to get people to admit that they were feeling under pressure. So that survey went out in 2017. It had about 220 responses, so it wasn't even that, the reach wasn't great, but the statistics we got back for that were really helpful, and lots of the legal press picked up on the results, and they ran with stories that got people talking about it. And then the JLD, the Junior Lawyers Division, ran the survey again in 2018 and again in 2019. So they've now got 3 years worth of stats looking at junior lawyers. And by junior lawyers, I mean paralegals who've obtained their LPC, trainee solicitors, and solicitors with up to 5 years post-qualification experience. So it was looking at quite a small pool of those in the legal profession, but actually was quite an in-depth study looking at both stress and mental health. So just probably helpful if I give you a couple of the overarching stats, but 90% of junior lawyers said they felt stressed by their work, with 25% of those saying that level of stress was severe or extreme, which is extremely high. And over in 2019 we were at 48% of junior lawyers saying that they'd experienced a period of mental ill health in the month before completing the survey, which is almost 1 in 2 junior lawyers, which is incredibly high. And we also asked a question in the 2019 survey about suicidal thoughts, and whether people had experienced suicidal thoughts as a result of stress at work, and 1 in 15 junior lawyers said that they had. So it was painting a picture of the sort of severe level of stress being experienced and the high levels of mental ill health being experienced by junior lawyers at that, the beginning part of their career. And I think there's particular issues with those at the beginning of their career, as we touched on before. It's such an uncertain time. Potentially it could be your first job straight out of university and law school. You could be at a large firm with a large cohort of trainees where you're competing against each other during your traineeship in the hope of getting an NQ position. You're then at the point where you're looking for an NQ role if you're not being kept on by your firm. So there's lots of challenges at that beginning part of your career, and also the nature of your work. If you're in private practice and you're the most junior in the team, you might have different work streams where work's coming down to you from lots of different partners, and that can be quite challenging to manage if you've not had to develop those skills before, and it's the first time you've worked in a law firm.
Yeah, no, and it's so funny because when I obviously spoke to you initially, I didn't realise that you'd been behind this survey, and as you said, it was really picked up and widely used. And like me, for the last 3 years, I've actually used those stats in my workshops when I've been talking to trainees and junior lawyers saying, 1 in 15 experienced suicidal thoughts in the last month. So as you were repeating them, I was like repeating them back to you in my head thinking, God, I know this report far too much, far too well.
Yeah.
But as you said, that when you are entering the kind of legal environment for the first time, it is incredibly challenging. And I think that often it's not necessarily other people's expectations, but it's our own expectations. And I think people place incredibly high expectations on themselves and what they think or they should be kind of capable of doing. And I think that's kind of partly in turn by the kind of people who are entering the legal industry. They're very driven, they're very ambitious. Obviously, they've got the academic qualifications, so they've got that kind of knowledge, but in a very highly competitive industry, it's how do you then kind of exceed and excel and show that you're capable, you're willing, you're keen. And I think that kind of leaves us putting a lot of pressure on ourselves in terms of what we think other people are expecting of us and where we want to get to as well.
I think that's really true. And as solicitors, we're taught to look for problems, look for risks, look for errors. We're constantly on the hunt looking for, we're looking 3, 4, 5 steps down the line when we're advising our clients to predict what could go wrong. The nature of the work that we do is negative. We're looking for problems. Yes, we're looking to find solutions and advise our clients on risks, but if we take the nature of the work that we're doing into our kind of day-to-day lives, we're then constantly thinking, what's going to go wrong, what's around the corner about our own lives. So the nature of that being the work, and also I guess going back to the point about the stigma around mental health, it's quite challenging for somebody junior in the profession to go into a firm that they've not worked at before and want to open up and share with somebody that they are struggling or they're finding things difficult. And we want to be encouraging the best talent to come into the profession, and we want to have law firms and legal employers where they've created a really positive working culture where not just the junior lawyers, but anyone who works for the business is encouraged to speak up and say if they're struggling, say if they're finding things difficult. We want to create a profession where we're all looking after each other, we're all looking out for each other. So there's a piece to play for employers in making sure they're creating the right working environments for people, but in the same vein, there's also work for individuals to be doing to, I guess most lawyers are perfectionists. We have to be. If we make a mistake, it could be critical to our career. It could hugely negatively impact a client. It could affect our reputation. And, trying to balance up our kind of personal view of ourselves, and wanting to be the best we can be, against not putting so much pressure on ourselves that we're actually then affecting how we behave and how we do our work, because we're putting too much pressure on ourselves to be able to perform at our best.
Yeah, there definitely is a balance to be had, and I've definitely experienced that at times in my career where I have been, and sometimes it wasn't necessarily because it was incredibly busy. Sometimes in some situations when it was quieter, I found my mental health was actually probably more negatively affected because I was anxious, I was worried, I was overthinking everything. If someone gave me a task, sometimes actually, when you have got a bit of stress behind you, you've got the deadline, you get on with it. Obviously, over prolonged periods of time, that can go, is hugely negatively impactful on our mental health. But sometimes it is not necessarily because we're so busy, it's because we've got that kind of perfectionist mindset. And also, I think a lot of people as well have a lot of kind of comparison amongst their peers, and almost like imposter syndrome, where you're looking at everyone around you and thinking, well, they seem to be doing fine, they seem to be managing, I need to as well. So that's definitely something I experienced in my career.
Yeah, and I think when you're thinking about the kind of stress bell curve, a little bit of stress before it turns into sort of negative stress, a little bit of pressure to encourage you to work more efficiently and to give you the motivation to do a task, efficiently, is good. That's really helpful. I think it's when that stress builds up to a peak where your productivity then dips because you've put too much pressure on yourself. That's where it becomes a problem. But certainly in the research through the JLD, high workload was the most commonly cited reason for stress at work. That was coupled with client demands and expectations, so that's pressure put on junior lawyers by their clients. The other top two were lack of support and ineffective management, again both within an employer's remit to change, making sure that junior lawyers and any lawyers have the right support in place, whether that's business support services, printing room services, having somebody there to supervise them properly, having a working environment that they can work in well. And then ineffective management, lawyers don't have any mandatory management training. So you've got these, lawyers moving up through the ranks, going from sort of solicitors to senior solicitors up into the partnership at, partnership model law firms. And there isn't any direct training, that's compulsory to show you how to be a good manager and get the best out of your people. We're all learning on the job. And actually, it's very important that if you are supervising junior lawyers, that you know how to have open conversations with them, be an active listener, be able to give constructive feedback. They're all really important skills that if you don't have, can put a lot of pressure on the people you're supervising, because they're in need of somebody to talk to and someone to give them feedback and to be looking out for them.
Especially at the moment whilst people are working remotely, that's a whole different ball game and an additional kind of skill set. And I must say that having worked with trainees over the last 6 months as part of the programs that we've been running through Leading Minds, I would say initially people were really concerned that they wouldn't get that support, but actually I think in some ways I've seen people being offered more support than they previously were when they were in the office, because people have kind of switched on to the fact they have to. So I don't think it's been all negative when we kind of are talking about working remotely when it comes to that support and skill development. That I think some junior lawyers actually are maybe finding that they're maybe in a slightly better position because their supervisor, their managers, the partners have had to actually switch on and really think about it, make a conscious kind of effort. The other thing I'd really love to know is, what got you interested in this field in the first place in terms of being involved in mental health within the legal industry?
So it was back in 2017. So I sat as a Law Society council member representing junior lawyers, and before that I'd sat on the Junior Lawyers Division Executive Committee, and that was something I'd got involved in as a trainee solicitor. So as a trainee at the High Street firm in Brighton, I was the only trainee in my year. There was a trainee the year ahead of me, so it was quite a challenging experience being kind of one of two trainees, but knowing now where I've worked at larger firms, that you know, you've got a pool of trainees that you're all coming in at the same time, there's a bit of camaraderie, you can ask questions. I really wanted to have other people around me that I could talk to about my experiences of being a junior lawyer and, you know, being a junior lawyer at a high street firm. So I got involved and set up the Sussex Junior Lawyers Division, must have been back in 2011, I think it was. So during my training contract, and it was through the work for the JLD, so at a local level and then at a national level, where I was just seeing lots of junior lawyers, you know, burning out, wanting to leave the profession because they found it too difficult. Lots of junior lawyers, you know, finding a lack of supervision a challenge. A lot of junior lawyers, you know, wanting someone to talk to, and a lot dealing with stress and questions coming up about feeling stressed and not knowing what to do, and it was all of those sorts of things that made me want to get sort of the softer skill type talks on agendas for the Junior Lawyers Division, particularly at the annual conference, where that's, you know, that's the signature event of the year for the JLD. I thought it was really important that they, you know, that they run sessions for juniors so that they can start talking about these kind of things that they might not feel comfortable talking to their firm about. And then with the Stevenson and Farmer review coming out and saying that professional bodies should be, you know, doing more to encourage either, you know, membership organisations to take more of a positive step to look at, you know, well-being in the workplace. To me, it all just kind of came together, you know, providing the surveys provided the kind of call to action that we needed to explain to employers what they needed to be doing more of to get the best out of their people. It helped junior lawyers experiencing periods of mental ill health or stress to have something that they could, you know, use as evidence to show that there was a problem and that this is something that needed to be talked about. And this is all about something that, you know, should be a positive thing. So supporting people at work should be a positive thing that employers want to do. And the survey was an initial way to get buy-in for solicitors to come to a talk, but actually it's created a lot more discussion in the legal press about what more employers should be doing to look after their people, and whether that's because it's the right thing to do and we should be looking after our employees. You know, they're our best asset as law firms. They're the people charging by the hour, going out and earning us money. But also thinking about, you know, the business case. If people are working more efficiently, that's going to affect your bottom line. You know, your profits are going to be higher if people are doing work in a more efficient manner. You know, if you've got people working well, you've got less days people being off sick, less people, you know, not coming into work. And, you know, it's much bigger picture. And that's kind of what led me to putting together the best practice guidance for the Law Society, which I did back in 2018. So I wanted the surveys and, you know, the results of the surveys that I've been going out talking about, writing blogs about, talking on podcasts about, you know, I wanted to do something positive to show the next step. So what should law firms be doing? It's all very well that I've gone out and told everybody what the problems are, but I wasn't really providing any solutions. So I worked with Nick Bloy of Wellbeing Republic to put together a best practice guide, which the Law Society endorsed. It's split into 3 core pillars for employers to think about what they could be doing to support good well-being in the workplace, and they were support, culture, and then education and training. And those 3 pillars then split down into lots of suggestions around what people could be doing. And last year I actually revised that guidance again, because the Law Society thought so much had happened since we released it the first time. You know, I'd got some great feedback from all sorts of people who'd read it and said, this is great, have you thought about this? You know, it's almost a moving beast of learning what law firms are doing. And alongside the guidance, I set up a roundtable series so people could come along and share best practice, share what they were doing, what had worked, what hadn't worked, what they could think about doing to address certain issues. And all of that information fed into the big review of the guidance I did. And the guidance was released last year in a sort of revised format. And it's got cartoons at the back that illustrate how to, spark up a wellbeing conversation with a colleague in the office. That can sometimes be quite a challenging thing to think about doing. And another one on how to be an active listener. It also has a sort of double page spread of things you can look at in colleagues in the office to see whether might there be something not quite right. Should you have that conversation? Should you ask someone how they are? Someone's on time all the time and they start coming in late. They start behaving differently to how they normally do. Are there signs that we should be picking up on, in looking at our colleagues and how they're behaving to make us think about going to check in on them and ask if they're okay? I wanted it to be a sort of all-round document where we were saying to employers, these are the kind of things that you should really think about doing. And the latest guidance breaks that down into sort of size of firm as well, because I appreciate, having worked at a small firm on the high street to now working at a firm in the city, the resources and almost the ability of what a firm can do very much depends on the size of the organisation, and what a large law firm can do compared to a small law firm will probably be very different. And different law firms and people in law firms will want very different things. So one of the sort of key things that the guidance suggests is actually going out and asking what your employees would benefit from. It's all very well thinking about putting initiatives in place, but actually if it's not something that individuals will use or they want, then actually just reading my guidance and me telling you it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it's a one-size-fits-all approach. So I wanted the guidance to be a working document where people could use it for ideas and then sort of develop it for their own organisation and their own organisation's culture.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And you've obviously done the mental health first aiders training, have you? Because a lot of the things you said there, I was like, yeah, we talk about that in our training sessions. Have you?
Oh yes, I have.
Yeah. It really rung true, because we do a lot of we do like half-day mental health awareness courses, and we do the mental health first aiders course as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things you spoke about there that I thought, yeah, no, I recognize that. So yeah, it's good to see such a cohesive kind of industry-wide approach as well kind of starting to take place. And I do think, from my experience, both from having been in the legal industry as a litigator, as a trainee, as qualifying as a litigator, and now in the realm that I'm working at, initially when I first started doing this about 6 years ago, there wasn't many conversations to be had, and it was quite difficult to start kind of, it was very like well-being, and it was a nice add-on. Whereas I think as the years have developed, or as the years have passed, people have started to realize that it's not really like a little add-on that they should be doing as a little HR initiative to, to talk about nutrition or whatever. It's that these things and reducing that stigma around about mental health and giving people the tools they need to support themselves not only kind of helps individuals, but does help, the firm's profitability, the firm's reputation. And I think that it has changed over the last few years in terms of the conversations we're having. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we've come a really long way in the last couple of years in terms of normalising the conversation, and there are lots of people speaking about it, lots of firms doing things, which is absolutely brilliant. And I know from my roundtable series where I've had lots of graduate recruitment managers coming along to talk about what the next generation of lawyers are looking for when they're at law fairs, when they're applying for training contracts, and it comes up again and again. The next generation are thinking, yes, I'm a lawyer, but I want to be properly supported. I want to work for a firm that looks after me and that has a nice culture, that has a positive working environment where it's open, I can speak openly about myself, I don't have to leave my personality and my emotions at the door, I can bring my whole self to work. And that's really important for the next generation of lawyers. And it's something that they're, people are asking law firms about at careers fairs and careers events. They're asking those questions. What have you got in place to support me to be, the best lawyer I can be? Which is fantastic. Yeah. And I don't think that was the nature of the conversation 5-10 years ago.
And I would agree that, given my work, that, over the last few years, I've worked with thousands of trainees, and this is all coming from firms coming to me wanting, coming to Leading Minds, wanting to us to run these programs because they understand how important it is, firstly, to take a proactive approach to support people by giving them the tools at the early stages, but also that people are expecting this. And I think that actually the the nature of the legal industry has really changed quite a lot, even over the last 10 years. So I trained, I would say just over 10 years ago, maybe. And when I was training, I wasn't accessible outside of working hours. I didn't have, back in the day, it was Blackberries. I'm sure people have just got their emails on their iPhones now or whatever it might be, but we weren't accessible in my first year. We were the first year of trainees to actually be then, the last year of trainees, to not be contactable outside of working hours. And then in my second year, we actually were given Blackberries and we were, constantly accessible. And it did really change the game. In some ways, I would say it was sometimes a perk because I knew what it was, a plus because I knew what was coming my way. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was all bad, but still that little red bleeping dot, still flashing dot, still haunts my dreams, thinking, I should be looking at it. Am I looking at it? So I think it was almost that things got to a certain point, like a peak, that things had to change because it, if you look back 20 years, people didn't really have emails so much in law firms and the demands were completely different. So I think the junior partners that are coming up through the firms as well, it's my intake who are starting to qualify. And I think that they see things very differently as well because they have faced that kind of pressure as compared to maybe someone who qualified, 25 years ago who didn't. So I think that's part of the cultural shift as well, that it's almost like it got to such a point, such a peak that something had to be done because they were losing, such top talent.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And thinking back to the 2 years I spent as a trainee, I didn't have a work phone. I left work in the office. When I went home on a Friday, that was it until the Monday morning. And it's very different now. You've got your work phone on you all the time. You're looking at it all the time. You're putting expectations on yourself to look at it. And I think that's probably been made even more difficult with lockdown earlier in the year and with people working from home. I think those blurred lines between when the workday finishes and when the home life starts have become very blurred. And I know that's been very difficult for a large number of people who have, being able to see the laptop in the corner of the room or having the phone ring on the computer or, as you said, the flashing light, having it in your home has also brought considerable challenges. But I think you're right, this generation of partners, they have come up through the ranks having experienced that always on culture, and that has been something that they have had to tackle and deal with for probably most of their professional careers.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing as well is, since lockdown, like you don't have that commute, you don't have that clear divide in the way that we do. And especially for people who, I'm very fortunate. I've got, my spare bedroom, which is my office. And as I said, I've worked from home for quite a few years now. So I had quite a good setup, but I've had calls with people who've been like sitting on the end of their bed, basically, especially when I was a junior, when I was a trainee, I did not have the luxury of having a spare room that we could have sat in, or even the kitchen table. We didn't have a kitchen table. So people are really kind of, maybe in quite a confined environment for quite a long time. And I think it can really lead to kind of leavism, like feeling like you're not able to kind of switch off in the evening, especially if you maybe feel like you weren't productive enough during the day. So I don't think it's even just that clear kind of divide. I think it's people are feeling, they've not got the ideal setup. They're struggling to kind of get what they think they should get done during the day, and then maybe being concerned that they then haven't done enough, so they should be working late into the night, and then it becomes a bit of a spiral. So I think there's so many different factors that have really kind of impacted on people's working lifestyle, but also on their mental health as well, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And I think you're right. For some people, they will have absolutely thrived working from home. For some people, it will have been absolutely brilliant and they'll have really enjoyed the flexibility of more time at home, more time with their family, more time to be able to potentially exercise before or after work, cook meals at home. That will have been fantastic. But for others that like the routine of going into the office, having a printer at the end of your desk, having all the facilities there, and actually I quite enjoy the commute. For me, my train home is really good for me to switch off. I'm on a train where I don't have any phone signal for 20 minutes. So for me, I'm sat there and I'm like, here's my 20 minutes of mindfulness practice. It's fantastic. I can practice mindfulness for 20 minutes, get off the train, and then I'm at home because, I've left London, I'm back out in Kent. And for me, that's really beneficial. And I really missed that at the start, not having the kind of segregation. But you're right, if you aren't as productive in the day as you think you should have been, then it's very easy to find yourself logging back in the evening because you're putting pressure on yourself because you feel like you haven't done enough.
Yeah, and I think especially if you feel like you're maybe not getting the exposure that you would in the office, so you kind of are seen to be there, people know you're working, whereas at home you can kind of be, if you go and grab a cup of coffee or something and then your phone rings, you're like, oh no, they'll have thought I wasn't here. I still have this, years after leaving the legal industry, that I find myself justifying to my colleagues, I was just, and they're like, it's fine, Claire, like it's fine. I'm on my own boss as well, and I'm still like, oh, because it is so ingrained in us, I think. So yeah. Definitely, I think different people have had very different experiences of lockdown. But I do think one thing that has been really positive that's came out of lockdown, and I'm sure you'll probably agree with this from being so closely involved in LawCare, is that so many firms have actually stepped back and thought, right, what is the future going to look like? So it's been such a great opportunity for firms, for HR, graduate recruitment, L&D partners to just really think, right, what do we actually want going forward? And I even saw Linklaters this week, they announced their kind of agile working policy that they're running out, and I'm sure lots of firms, I've heard lots of firms are doing surveys to ask people, what do they actually want going back into the office, and what do they actually want their day-to-day life to look like. And I think that has been a huge positive, and I think it will be a huge positive for reducing the stigma around about mental health, having those conversations, and people kind of being more incentivized to run these kind of training sessions where we're giving people the tools they need to set themselves up for success as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think certainly thinking back to the first few weeks when we went into lockdown, it was such a shock. It all happened very quickly. We almost took our laptops home one night and didn't go back in the next.
Yeah.
Was kind of how I look and feel that it all happened. But yeah, lockdown encouraged people to check in on each other. And yes, we may well have been checking in on each other in the office, putting our head round the corner of someone's office and saying hello and, having a cup of tea with a colleague over lunch. But you're right, it kind of forced people to check in on each other and see how they were. And I think that's really beneficial. It almost forced people to have a conversation about how they were feeling. How are you finding lockdown? How are you finding things? What are you finding challenging? They were all quite personal questions that we probably wouldn't ask in the office. It definitely got a lot more personal. And in terms of flexible working for firms going forwards, I think it's been fantastic because it has focused the minds of the senior leadership to think, actually, are we getting the best out of our people in the way we currently work, and are there elements of what we've learned about home working where we can be more flexible with our people to get the best out of them? And I think that can only be a positive thing.
I couldn't agree more. The other thing I'd add to that as well is that I think, not only are we having those conversations that we wouldn't have had before because we might have seen it as a sign of weakness, admitting that there was anything challenging, it kind of gave us a prompt to say it. But I think seeing it into other people's personal lives has been so, different. It's not something, you have your work face, you have your work clothes, you don't have kids running about behind you or dogs or budgies like me. It's like you've got your poker face and you go. Whereas now, we've seen people's, kitchens, living rooms, bedrooms, everything, as we've seen, how they're, a bit more personality about people. And I think that's broken down quite a few barriers as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is right. And also, even just being able to see someone outside of the office is probably, there's colleagues who I probably haven't spent much time with outside of the office, but, then seeing people in their home working environment, you're right, in their home clothes rather than their office clothes, it does, that making things slightly more informal does encourage people to, I think, speak more openly and, have a bit of a chat with colleagues. That water cooler moment is so important, in the office, having chats with colleagues, builds good relationships at work. And it's those good relationships that, encourage you to think better and come up with more creative solutions and having better conversations. So yeah, having a more open sort of set of dialogue with colleagues is a great thing.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, I'm really excited about your study and what the survey and what's going to come out of it. And I think, as I said at the start, you know, anybody, I would really encourage you within the legal industry really to complete it, because it is going to help move that momentum. And if you do want to see change, you know, by participating, by taking part, it does mean that the stats are coming back and they're helping, you know, people that want to make change create more of a business case. So yeah, it's really great to see. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. We always finish off the podcast with a few questions. The first one I'd love to know is, what does resilience mean to you?
So to me, resilience is the ability to be able to deal with sort of day-to-day challenges. So I know we had a lot of feedback on the word resilience around the JLD surveys, because we called them wellbeing and resilience surveys. And a lot of people said, but resilience is a really bad thing. It encourages you to be this superhuman and, you know, cope with all of the life stresses and all of the terrible things that come your way. But that's not what it means to me. Resilience is being able to deal with day-to-day things that come up. You know, resilience isn't being able to be a superwoman and deal with, you know, some huge massive problem that comes your way. You know, that's an exceptional circumstance. Yeah. To me, resilience is just having, you know, the level of skills to be able to deal with kind of day-to-day challenges.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I agree with you. I've always seen resilience as a real positive word, whereas the one that makes me feel a bit funny is well-being, because it sounds like, oh, wouldn't that be lovely if we had time to, you know, eat this way or exercise, whereas I'm like, no, it's like a fundamental. If we do this, we get this. So yeah, I agree with you there in your definition. And the other thing I'd love to know is, what would your number one tip for sustainable success within the legal industry be?
For individuals? I think probably not to be so hard on yourself. So I think we're hard on ourselves about everything. We're hard on ourselves that we're not, you know, we're not doing enough self-care, you know, we're not exercising enough, we're not eating well enough, we're not, you know, meditating for long enough, we're not, you know, practicing mindfulness as often as we should be. And I personally give myself such a hard time, particularly because I'm going out telling people, oh, if you do all of these great things, it will make your life easier, you know, and I struggle to find time to practice yoga every morning like I'd like to. So I think just, you know, being appreciative when we do spend time on self-care, but not giving ourselves a hard time when we don't do it. And that also feeds into work, you know. Don't give yourself such a hard time about everything, you know, just do your best and don't compare yourself to others. Just be the best person you can be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel the same as well. Sometimes when I'll be doing workshops talking about, you know, meditation, I think, God, I haven't meditated in like 2 weeks. Or yoga. I don't actually really like yoga, and I know that I'm meant to because it's part of this perception, but just not for me. So yeah, I think that's such a good thing, just to not kind of give yourself such a hard time. And the final thing I'd love to know is, who inspires you within the legal industry?
Oh, that's a good one. So like many others, I think Lady Hale is my absolute female idol in the legal industry. She's done so much in her career, but also Christina Blacklaw's the former Law Society president, who did so much for dealing with well, she sits on the Women Lawyers Division Committee, but also did a lot around gender equality and the work of women in law. So the two of them have really inspired me to, you know, if there's something, you know, I saw something in the legal industry that I didn't think was being spoken up about enough, and I've spoken up about it. And I know that Christina Blacklaws has done the same in terms of, you know, women in law and, you know, getting firms to address what more they can be doing to deal with the, you know, imbalance of females in senior leader positions. So those two for me are my kind of two legal idols.
And I'll tell you something very exciting. I've actually had 2 people on the podcast who said you.
Oh, that's incredible.
So so you are creating that change, and by kind of speaking up about something you think does need to be you know, spoken about, I think you are inspiring others as well. So there you go. Could have told you that before, but I thought I'd save it till now.
Oh, bless you. Oh, that's so lovely to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually quite a few people were like, you have to have Kayleigh on your podcast. You have to, from the very start. So I'm so glad that we've actually managed to kind of fit this into both of our diaries, and it's been really, really lovely to, you know, hear about the you know, the work that you've done with the JLD, what you do with LawCare, and just kind of where your passion comes from as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with me today.
No, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been lovely to chat so openly and talk about the work I've been doing. So thank you very much for inviting me on.
Great. And for everyone that's on the podcast today, I just wanted to say, please do follow us on LinkedIn so that you're kept up to date with our weekly episodes. And if you want to receive the weekly episode updates to your inbox as well, go onto our website, which is leadingmindsglobal.com/podcast, and you can just subscribe there. So thank you so much, Kayleigh, for joining me today, and thank you everyone for listening as well.